Hello, everyone. My name is Raelan, and I am here with Sam. I'm really excited. This is another chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME CFS, full recovery story. Yay! Or he's back to his level of health prior to becoming unwell, back to that and beyond, doing much better. So that's just really great to hear. So, hey, Sam, thank you so much for doing this today.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, where you live, where you're from?
So I grew up in just outside London in the UK, a small place called Sussex, and spent most of my life there. I spent a little bit of time in Kenya. I lived in Kenya for a bit and went to school out there for a bit as well. And then we came back, and and then eventually I found myself living here in Lisbon in Portugal. So and we've just moved here, so it's pretty amazing. The nicer weather, sunshine all day.
Such a beautiful country. So why don't you take us back? Can you tell us a bit about your story?
So I left school at 16 and I became a joiner, and it's like a carpenter, but I used to make the furniture in a workshop. And so I did that for 5 years. And then after those 5 years, I felt like I needed to do some more studying. I felt like I needed to go to university and use my brain a little bit more than I was at the present time. And so I enrolled on a university degree. I got a job at the same time. So I did a distance learning degree, which meant that I had to really do it in my evenings and on the weekends, because I was working full-time as well. And this was as a building surveyor stroke architectural sort of technician. So I used to draw buildings and everything like that. And the degree was pretty hard for me because I hadn't had the experience into my 17, 18, 19, 20 of doing any work like that. And so I put myself under a lot of pressure to do well, and it was a 4-year degree course. Okay. At the same time as starting my degree, I broke up with my girlfriend at the time, and that was a 2-year relationship at that point. And then I started to go to the gym, started to feel like I needed to get into a bit of shape. Or better shape anyway than I was prior. And you can sort of just see what's kind of happening now. It's like you become quite naive, especially at that age, and you believe that you can do everything. And about 6 months after starting that new job, when I was about 21, the fatigue started to creep in, and I found myself drinking more and more coffee just to keep going through the day. And it was getting to a point where I felt like I wasn't tired, but my eyes just wanted to shut. And I wasn't yawning. And then I found out that this was creeping in at certain times of the day when I really started to pay attention. And it wasn't happening during my gym workouts either, which was the interesting thing. You'd expect if you're doing something tiring to feel tired during that session, but it wasn't, and it was kind of a delayed tiredness that sort of crept in. And then I found that I couldn't concentrate as well. My fatigue was pushing further into some sort of like a brain fog. I think with chronic fatigue we talk about brain fog quite a lot, and the ability just to hold a trail of thought. I found myself wondering what I was doing and sort of almost blanking out. And this would happen all the time. It'd be very difficult to be productive in the workplace, therefore putting more pressure on yourself. Digestive issues started to kick in. Then anxiety started to creep in, depression, and lots of small things. And they all sort of happened one by one. It wasn't always at the same time. And then eventually I finished my degree course and I started a new job. And when I did that, my health just sort of it took a nosedive. I got to a point where I was taking a lot of days off. I was getting unwell a lot. My immune system clearly wasn't working that well. My digestive system was getting worse. I was getting to a point where I think I was eating carrots and something at one point, because nothing, or strawberries, was a lifesaver. And watermelon. The only things that I could have that would give me a bit of energy but wouldn't give me a stomach upset or wouldn't deplete me of my energy, because every time I ate, I would just need to go and lie down. And so there was lots of things that were starting to happen. And then I got diagnosed a few years after that with chronic fatigue syndrome. And I knew about chronic fatigue syndrome before because my mother had it, and her twin sister has something similar, fibromyalgia, and my mum's mother also had chronic fatigue syndrome. So we were like hoping that I didn't have it, because I was looking at this illness that there is nothing that really cures it. And we were looking along the lines of adrenal fatigue at the time, because that seemed much more logical and easier to cure. And I later found out that it wasn't easy to cure, and that the symptoms just kept coming and coming and coming, and the severity was increasing. And I got to a point where I just couldn't work anymore. I couldn't get out of bed. My complexion was grey. I looked unwell. I was losing weight. And yeah, I just felt like my whole world was kind of collapsing, and I was like 24, 25, 26, around, all those years. I do look back now and I go, basically my whole 20s was kind of wiped out, but it all happens for a reason. That's what I came back to think at the end of it. So the symptoms were debilitating. And then when I look back on my life and I start to see that I had these things already before, but they just weren't as severe. So the brain fog that I had for most of my life, I found schoolwork very difficult. And I just see like the digestive issues. I look back to when I was a child and having these sharp shooting pains in my stomach, and they'd come and go occasionally, but I'd think nothing of it. And so I never really raised it, because it was never a long-term sort of problem. And yeah, I just felt almost a bit inadequate, especially in the classroom. I was always at the last in the set, and always the worst grades. And now looking back, there was something going on that was stopping my brain, stopping my body from working as well as it could do. And, doing the university degree, going to the gym, and, just working full time, overstretching myself, it was just enough to really trigger what was already there. That's just how I perceive it anyways. There was a low level of all of these symptoms. And as I started to push myself, these symptoms started to grow and expand and really take over. And so it kind of, finding a partner, finding a girlfriend, or meeting anyone, or forming any sort of connection was very difficult, because I felt like I'd be a burden. And I think a lot of people with this feel like that as well, that why would anybody spend their time hanging around somebody who feels like I did? It is not a fun time to be around, and almost you have to be very selfish. That's one of the first lessons, was that you have to be selfish to just survive. And it was surviving. It was, I think the classic term it was like walking through treacle. That's what every single day felt like. And I actually missed out one of the biggest things of it all, which is very common, and that's the insomnia element. Not being able to sleep, or managing to get to sleep and you wake up an hour later, and the cycle just keeps happening, and then you're waking up at 5 a.m, you've got to get up at 6. And the sleep element was huge for me. I didn't feel rested. I woke up feeling like I'd been hit by a bus. I felt hungover. Every time I woke up in the morning, I felt like I'd been drinking like 10 pints, something ridiculous. And it would take 3 or 4 hours for that feeling to wear off. So part of me was understanding that during sleep, I wasn't getting the sleep. I wasn't getting the sufficient cycles of sleep. And my body just wasn't healing. It wasn't recovering. It wasn't coming out of sympathetic state. And it just made everything ridiculously difficult. Even the simplest tasks. We know that the only way you get diagnosed with this illness was if you have a certain amount of symptoms. You fill a criteria. And nobody has to have the same ones. You can have a different collective of symptoms. But the diagnosis wasn't really I think a lot of people look for the diagnosis so they know what they've got to work with. But I think this is a very difficult illness to do anything about, because the symptoms are so vast. But it can help when you're talking to people and you go, oh yeah, I have this, and you can sort of explain it a bit better. When you're sitting in an office and you've got people working around you and functioning, let's just say normally, it makes it very difficult for them to also understand. And so you're then in this situation where you feel like you're being judged the whole time, and there's nothing you can do about it. So it was a very toxic time, especially in my last job, in the office. I was still training as well to be a chartered surveyor, and I just put a lot of pressure on myself, and the environment wasn't good for me.
I'm so sorry to hear that you've had to go through all this. That sounds like a nightmare. That was an incredibly long journey. I'm wondering, I always wonder, of course, because I also grew up with a parent with chronic fatigue syndrome. What did you think of that diagnosis when you did get it?
It made sense. For me, it was like I was already looking at adrenal fatigue. I did the saliva test, the one where you do it in the morning and lunchtime and the evening, to see what your cortisol levels are like during the day. And it was obvious that things weren't normal. But you take that to a GP and my local doctor, and they can't do anything about it. They don't sort of take any note of it, because it's not part of their system. But I knew that clearly there's something. Cortisol is supposed to be high in the morning to get you out of bed and to get you up and ready for the day, and it's supposed to tail off throughout the day. So by the evening, you're ready to go to sleep. Whereas that was all messed up. When I was ready to go to sleep, my energy would come up, and the energy was just coming up at the wrong time, effectively. So yeah, the diagnosis was useful to help me really hone in. Like I could research other people with this illness and what helped them, what worked for them. But it really got to a point where I stopped researching, because I was so into genetics. I was like, if I've got it and my mum's got it and her twin sister's got something very similar and my grandmother's got it, then there has to be something that's passed on. There has to be. I also, my father's side, there's an alcoholism element that sort of creeps in as well. Luckily, there is no addictive tendencies, and I do feel very lucky about that, because it is very easy for someone who is suffering with some sort of trauma to go, oh, I'm going to give up and I'm just going to look at the end of the bottle or whatever it is, or take the pills or whatever. It's and so and that's a long line of alcoholism. That's not just my father, that's his father and his mother, and it just continues. So you think about it, I've got chronic fatigue and an illness, and so I felt like in a way my mum was very supportive, and that was useful. You had someone that was close to you that could understand what you're going through.
What was it like for her from your perspective? Because my mom was already gone by the time I got sick, and I always think it would have just devastated her to see the same thing happen to me. So what was it like for her watching you go through this, do you think?
I think it caused her more stress. I think it caused her, she's obviously worried, because what am I going to do if I can't have a job, if I can't hold down a job? What happens to me? And and it's always going to bring back, I think, experiences. And especially when I'm very close to my mum, and just talking about the symptoms, that was very helpful to relate. But every time you talk about that kind of thing, it brings up for her how she felt. And even she'd say that she's much better, but I still feel like she's not quite there yet, because she did something called the lightning process with Phil Parker. I think it's Phil Parker, and sort of retraining the brain, sort of the connections, and changing a few things to reinforce positivity and, in a sense, remove the negative. And I actually taught her to meditate as well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that, it made a huge difference. That her immune system still isn't great, and recently she got COVID, and she's been suffering with long COVID, which
Oh my goodness.
it adds more and more to it. So thankfully she doesn't have to worry about me, and it's the stress that's added. When you have a child who's unwell, that constant worrying about them and their future, and you just wish them to get well. And so if someone's already suffering from an illness like that, having this on top is not going to do you any favors. It was a challenging time, but also we had some common ground, and it was sort of in it together. So whatever worked for me, I go, oh, you should try this.
It's so interesting listening to you talk and share your story. I don't know how you feel when you hear people's stories, but I obviously share quite a bit of mine on my channel, and I get lots of people contacting me or just leaving comments like, it's like you're telling my story. I did all of those things, and it's so strange. I was feeling a lot of that when you're talking. I just, going through it, I felt so alone in my experience, and like I must be the only person in the world going through this. Of course, I knew I wasn't, but it just feels very unique and isolating. And we're just, going through so many of the same stages and processes and feelings and emotions. And then when I hear you talk, I'm like, oh my goodness, I could be saying so much of this. I feel like I've been there, so it's just so interesting. I think that's one of the great things about sharing these stories is that we all feel a little bit less alone. There are other people who get it, which is it's a great thing. It's important. I'm curious for you, were you seeing a lot of mainstream doctors, or, once your health started getting really bad, what happened then?
So finance for me was quite a struggle. So going privately or doing anything like that, I was relying pretty much on our National Health Service in the UK. And when you start going down this route, they almost go, look, we don't know what to do. And that's what my GP said. Is like, there's nothing that we can do really. I've done all the tests. I did all the blood tests. I did everything, and it all came back normal. I think the only one that didn't come back normal was my immunoglobulin level, which was just below normal. And so I went to an immunologist, and I went through like 7 months of tests with them, and they couldn't find anything. So what I ended up doing was realizing that Western medicine wasn't going to help me. And I started to look at other things like traditional Chinese medicine. I went and did some acupuncture to see if that would work or bring any sort of relief. I always felt like those things aggravated it. Funnily enough, it was, I go and do something that's supposed to be good for you and supposed to be relaxing, and it felt like it aggravated the symptoms. And I just felt like it was always very strange how that would happen. So then I left them alone. And, you hear some people talking about the Herxheimer reaction, how, you start looking into SIBO or and other things in the digestive system, how you have this die-off reaction when you do something good. And I went through all of that. I went through hell with this die-off reaction. And it made me feel worse, and I didn't feel like I got any better afterwards. And you start looking at oregano and all these herbs that can really kill off some of the bad bacteria in the gut, and it just made me feel 10 times worse. And so, I was messing around with looking at genetics and methylation. So I flew out to Miami to see a doctor about the genes and the methylation cycle, and what are my detox pathways, how are they working, how are they functioning, and have I got particular upregulation or downregulation in some of my genetics? Are some pathways working too much or too little? And then I started looking at sulfur in my diet, and I started went through all the food intolerance tests and everything like that. And it was just kept going round and round and round. And so I ended up taking like 17 or 18 different supplements a day to increase like my vitamin D receptor and to try and get these pathways moving a bit. The Krebs cycle, all of these things, how to get energy from food, because I wasn't getting energy from food. I was getting the opposite. So I looked into all these little things on a microscopic level, and it felt like too much work, to be honest. It felt like I had to become a rocket scientist to work out what was going on. And I was spending all my emotional time and energy trying to work out what wasn't working. And so I did a bit of kinesiology, actually did a course for 6 months to train in basic kinesiology to work out what was good for me, and I could test other people and see what happened. And then I just got to a point where this just isn't working. And it was really at that moment where I let go. I was just like, let's just see what comes, because usually things are starting to, because you're interested in this space or the alternative medicine, things just start to come your way a little bit more. And I took the pressure off, took the brakes off. I ended up going to Portugal for a week's holiday, a couple of weeks holiday. And I felt a little bit better being in the sun, on the sand, in the sea. Felt a little bit more relaxed. But as soon as I went back to the UK, I felt horrible again. And I was just like, how does this change from feeling more relaxed to going back to the UK and back into the day job and just feeling like you did before you left? It's like, I've been away. Surely I should start to feel a bit better. And I then managed to get myself to a wedding the week after. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and he recommended to go and learn meditation. And I'd read about meditation, but I never thought that I could do it. I never felt like I would be able to meditate. Like, my brain is way too busy, or not busy enough. Something wasn't right. There's no chance it could work. So that was on a Saturday, and I signed up for the course on the Monday. That was a 4-day course, or 3-day course actually, this one. And I didn't hesitate. I saw what it was doing for my friend, and he'd been doing it for a year, and I never really asked him about it before. And it just started to make me a little bit more curious. I was like, okay, let's go and see what this is. And it wasn't cheap. To learn to meditate, you'd expect it to be something like going to a yoga class or something. But this particular form of meditation wasn't cheap. And so you had to give up something, i.e. quite a bit of money, to go and learn how to meditate correctly. And I remember thinking, oh, this is quite a lot of money. And at the time, for me, it was. Now I look back on that, and I completed the last day of the training. I was like, well, this is very, very cheap. It was something that I learned, and it was a pivot point in my life, like really allowing myself to be put in that situation where I'd go in and learn meditation. 5-10 years ago, I would have laughed at the idea. And so it's amazing how this journey, it starts to take you, and it breaks you down until you get to a point where you're desperate, and you'll do anything. And things that you wouldn't have thought about before and now start to become very appealing.
Oh, it's incredible. Desperation has got to be the biggest, I think, mind opener out there, at least in my experience. All of a sudden, almost nothing was off the table. Like, sure, let's do it. I'll try it. So with this meditation course that you took and you started implementing it, and then your health started to improve, or how did that look?
So interestingly, you read about meditation and you hear about the benefits that it can give you. Again, anything that I was doing that's supposed to be good for me was not making me feel better. Meditation still fell in that category, interestingly. What was really interesting about this was on the first session of the course, I felt a light. I felt there was something that was encouraging me within to pursue this. And that wasn't necessarily the teacher being very good or anything like that. There was a feeling when I closed my eyes and I thought a particular sound in my mind, that I was going to a whole new different state. I was going to a state that I'd never felt before. And then I started to realize that, wow, I actually was stressed. And I was feeling, because I believe that when you don't have anything to compare it with, you normalize stress. how you feel right now is how you've normalized it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in it, it's very difficult to know any different. And as soon as I learned that mantra, as soon as I had that first session, I felt that pure relaxation. Now, with this, it doesn't last very long. So Vedic meditation is either taught over three days or 4 days. And they're like an hour and a half to 2 hours each session, effectively. And on every single session, I'd go home, and my flatmate they thought that I'd taken drugs. They were like, "You've taken something. There's a spring in your step. You look alive." And it was a boost. It was a boost. So for the next 2 years after that, I was relying on meditation to get that boost, just a little glimmer of light each day. And what happened was eventually that light started to grow outside of my meditations. And so you hear stories how meditation can help you within 3 months of doing it, you're going to start to feel some real benefits. I felt some benefits, but I didn't feel as much as everyone else around me. But then I realized that I was also 10 steps behind them with my illness. I was coming from a point that wasn't comparable with anyone else on that particular course. So it took a while. It took a few years for me to really feel the effects of what the practice can do. And I was taking advanced practices as well. I was doing advanced courses, advanced level courses, learning about the Vedic knowledge. I was doing rounding retreats, really sort of industrial sort of meditation. And this is all while I hadn't actually changed my environment. So I was still in that job that I didn't really like doing. I didn't like being in that situation. And what I quickly learned was, when you take yourself out of a situation or an environment that you're not feeling comfortable in, something like meditation really starts to shine through. And it's almost like the inflow of stress that you're giving into your nervous system. Meditation can only take so much out. So if the inflow is much greater than what the meditation can take out, then it's very difficult for the effects and the benefits to start to shine through. So literally, as soon as I stopped doing that job, and actually at that point I wanted to become a teacher. I was so taken away with how I felt that at the beginning I always wanted to become a teacher. As soon as I learned this technique, I was like, well, how do I do this? But I'm not in a position to become a teacher because I've got so much work to do on myself first. And so I felt like that was really, 10, 20 years down the line or something. And after two years, I started to get very interested. And because I felt my benefits come through, and I started to take it a lot more seriously. And so I eventually got to the point where I had this opportunity to become a teacher. And I quit my job. The interesting thing about quitting the job at this time was I had another job lined up for a temporary of eight months, just to keep me going, to save up some money. The day that I was supposed to hand my notice in, they called up and said, "Sorry, Sam, the work just didn't come through. We can't offer you this job." And I was like, at this point, I was like, okay, I still need to leave this job because I'm not happy. And so I just went with my gut, and I just handed my notice in. The day after I handed my notice in, they called me back and they said, "Oh, we've actually got enough work. We can actually take you on. When can you start?" So there's a bit of a leap of faith that I had to undertake and that's what this practice does. That's what meditation does, is it starts to get you to trust yourself more and more and more. Your intuition starts to grow. Your awareness starts to grow. And for me, that was a big moment. As soon as I did that, I let that go and I felt a weight off my shoulders. I didn't massively dislike my job, but I just didn't like doing that kind of work. I didn't like the busy open plan office, that kind of thing. It was just too much stimulation for me all day, every day. So yeah, then I decided to become a teacher, and I went through the training process, and the benefits just came through tenfold until I got to a point where I was like, wow, I'm actually a lot better than I was before I've ever been. There is no comparison to how I feel now and to how my brain works. This was the other thing, is I felt like I can actually learn things and retain information. I didn't have to work 10 times harder than anyone else. I felt like things were starting to come online. I was more sociable. I was more confident. I would open up to people. I would share things. I wasn't this closed off person that walked out into the street before and felt like the whole body was aching. I felt like you hear noise and the body just tenses up and starts aching. I used to go into like a bar or a pub or something like that with a few friends, and the noise would I just have this ache in my back and I just have to leave. It was just like backache. And as soon as I left, it would start to calm down again. So this is all part of what you're taught in meditation, effectively, is that we live in a world that is very stimulating for our nervous system. And we all experience trauma and stress. And you can only take so much before the body starts presenting symptoms to show you that you need to do something about it. And this is what happened with me. It was building and building. It was getting worse and worse until I started to take control and I started to pay some sort of real attention to it. And it made all the difference. So meditation was that pivot point. It started to change everything as soon as I started to learn. But it wasn't a fast process. 2 years it took to get to a point where it's like, okay, now it's starting to work. But it would work in small amounts. So I'd meditate, I'd feel good for 10 or 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It got to a point where I was living again, basically. And it was I can always give it to the meditation, how it was just this, I talked about like this pivot point in my life when I was 26, and it just started to change everything when I opened myself up to that experience. And I went into it being very skeptical because I didn't believe that anything would work for me. And I was like, what's this thing really going to do for me? But on the course, and we're trained as being a teacher, we're trained to then pass on the knowledge of how it affects our nervous system. And that the world around us is so busy and so fast paced that it's very difficult to keep up with it. And fundamentally, technology has evolved so fast that human physiology can't keep up with it. We haven't evolved fast enough to deal with it. And we're just taking the input, the information coming into our awareness and going through our brain is too overwhelming. And we see it with a lot of people. And I know back in the time I was doing some research on chronic fatigue syndrome, a lot of people would go to university, and that's when the symptoms would start to come out, the pressure that's put on someone. And I think we're just, especially with technology now, we've got information at our fingertips. We've got so much data going through us that it just overworks us. And it almost causes something like a short circuit. And our nervous system just goes into survival mode the whole time. And so that's something I realized pretty quickly. And the reason I became a teacher was because I saw how much of a difference it made for me, and I wanted to share that with other people and help other people get to that point where they can and not only recover from their symptoms, but also to surpass it, to get the most out of being a human being, to be their best self. I look back now and absolutely everything I'm thankful for. I'm thankful for that I went through those years of feeling that way, because otherwise I would not have learned the lessons to get myself to where I am now. And I can say that, from the situation where I am right now is easy to say. But somebody going through it right now they're not going to be thinking that. And I wasn't thinking that at the time either. So yeah, meditation was a big part. There were a few other things. I did some sound therapy as well. And the meditation is effectively a sound. It's working on vibrational frequencies that affect the mind, take the mind to a different state of consciousness. And I worked with tuning forks, and you probably see some more instruments behind there. But sound made a huge difference for me. And I did a little bit of therapy work. It wasn't really therapy. It was kind of more energetic healing as well. Just to prepare myself for my teacher training, to get myself in the best place I can. Because I felt like the improvements were drastic, but I wanted to get the most out of it before I went and did this training, which was not an easy thing, especially when you're sleep deprived throughout it. Just the combination of getting out of the environment, the impacts of being in an environment that doesn't work for you and is not serving you, was a big part of that process as well. The inflow of stress was being reduced. And so the the benefits could start to come through. It made a big difference.
The other interesting thing when you're talking that struck me is because I hear this from a lot of people that I talk to, that a big part of what they feel contributed to their condition was just the overload of the modern world, the overflow of stress and anxiety and all of these things definitely seems to be a contributing factor. But then the other piece of that is, because it's not just us with chronic fatigue syndrome that are facing those things. One of the complaints that I hear from people is, I tell people about what I'm going through, that I have this, and they say, oh, I'm tired too. And we hear so often that the response is, oh, I'm also tired. And we get frustrated because it feels like they don't get it. But also it's concerning, why is everybody else also exhausted? Like, why is that the response that we hear from everybody? So even people who aren't chronically ill, it feels like many people are struggling with this modern world. And it's very few people seem to really be thriving.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And I, from my experience, I found that those who suffer with an illness like this, or any other chronic illness, they're usually more sensitive individuals. They're usually more sensitive and more susceptible to outside information affecting them. You could say they're more empathic in a way as well. The smallest things can affect them and their energy levels. So yeah, that's one of the reasons I see it. Another reason is in the Vedic tradition, so this tradition that I teach, this meditation tradition, it's believed that you inherit up to 7 generations of stress. So which tied in very nicely with my inherited chronic illness, was that actually, you know what, if my cells, the inherited cells from my mother's side, that hold memory from 7 generations in the past that gets passed down the line, then yeah, maybe you are predisposed to feeling like this. And a lot of what we do with this meditation is that we start to work away at that. So we're not just working away at the stress that we experience now, it's the stress that we've been prone to inheriting. And it makes, when you start to think of things like that, it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Before I was on a microscope looking at genetics, and I was like, okay, if I can just upregulate this enzyme, then maybe it'll start to work, or this pathway would work. And I found very quickly that I just had to take a step back from all of that. I had to look at the bigger picture. I had to let go of my left brain dominating everything about this illness. And I needed to step back from that and to stop overanalyzing everything. My intellect was just going crazy trying to work it out. When I did take that step back, and meditation allows you to do that, I just sort of started to let go of all of it, and my body could then just start to calm down. Because when you're getting frustrated trying to work out how to help yourself, that can be overwhelming in itself. Just trying to work out all the right foods to eat, everything like that is stressful, because you're like, if I don't pick the right food today, well, how am I going to feel tomorrow? So everything that you do right now can affect how you feel tomorrow. That's how I felt. Like the smallest things could make a big difference, either good or bad. It's a very big thing. It also interesting, life-changing experience, this whole thing. It made such a big difference to my healing journey just to find that quietness and stillness. And it was the catalyst, the foundation for my regaining health and surpassing how I'd felt before.
It's incredible. This sounds like it's been a massively transformative journey for you. It sounds like you're probably a completely different person in many respects than before this started.
Yeah. The shy person living in a shell is kind of no longer there. I'm still quiet and I listen more, but I'd be a little bit more extroverted when I feel like I can be. It's an interesting thing. The confidence starts to come through. You're no longer working out in conversations, should I speak now? Or I don't know if I should speak. And it's just more fluid, and everything just flows a lot better.
Incredible. Yeah, so much respect for meditation and what it can do. And I've been working hard to incorporate more into my own life. And I'm looking forward to learning more from you about this. And I know we've already talked about this, and we're going to have a part 2 to this video for anyone else who also wants to learn more, because you have a lot of, strategies and techniques and things, some tips for people to help get them started. So that video is coming soon for people who want to learn more. But for now, if people wanted to connect with you or learn more, how could they do that?
They can simply send me I think the easiest thing these days is if you're on Instagram, then look up soma.meditation. Soma is SOMA. And you can send me a direct link and a direct message, and I can reach out to you that way. Otherwise, send me an email and I'll respond back pretty quickly.
Great. And this will all be linked, of course, in the video description for anyone who wants to find that information. So yes, very much looking forward to our follow-up to this video. But for now, as we kind of wrap things up, is there anything that you want to say to people out there who are still in the middle of this, still facing significant health challenges, or, any advice for your younger self if you could go back?
I think the biggest piece of advice would be to learn to let go. To learn to let go, because we hold on to things that happen to us or around us, and that can make a huge difference in how the body reacts to things. And again, I think the environmental factor in this plays a big part. If you're in a situation where you're not happy, whether it's a relationship or at home or in the workplace, then make those adjustments. And you don't have to make drastic adjustments. You can make small adjustments where you can. But yeah, I mean, the ability to let go is huge because we have triggers. We see things that trigger old memories and traumas, and they're adding to this inflow of stress that's affecting us. And our nervous system needs to start to calm down a little bit.
I feel my nervous system calming down even just hearing you talk about this. Like, yes, this is amazing. This is what we need. It's not an easy thing to do, but I could see the power in it. Well, I'm so glad you're where you are now. I'm so sorry that you've had to go through what I'm sure was a complete nightmare at times, but it's amazing to see the person that you are now, and that now you're out in the world helping other people who are to also thrive and be well. So really incredible. Thank you so much, Sam, for taking the time to do this today. I really appreciate it. I'm really looking forward to that part 2 video. So, and for people watching, of course, if you have questions, you can put them in the video comments. I'm sure Sam would be happy to answer them there, or reach out to him on Instagram. And
of course.
Yeah. Until next time, that's it for today. To everyone who's watching, thank you again, Sam, and I'll see you in the next video.